Coming up on today's show, a railway politics special. Labour's plans for the railway generate a great deal of comment, some of it thoughtful, some of it, frankly, bonkers. We take a look at what people have been saying and discuss some of the bigger points. Huw Merriman was our big interviewee earlier in the week, and we reflect on what he said and whether we agreed with him. And Richard gets excited, there's a thing, about a very special train that's going to be running in June for a very important cause. Hello, and welcome to Green Signals, your railway podcast from me, Nigel Harris, full of a cold, for which my apologies, in lovely Lincolnshire, and
me, Richard Bowker. The first time in about 3 weeks I've been able to have a conversation without sounding as blocked up as a Thames water sewage pipe. So actually, I'm feeling rather good.
Well, that's my job today, and it was you that gave me this cold at our weekend on the Festiniog. I'm convinced of it, so thank you for your generosity.
Pleasure.
Sure it was. What a whirlwind of a week it was last week, eh, Richard? We went straight from publishing our big interview with Sir Philip Rutnam, which seems to have gone down well, on Tuesday, to recording our regular show for the week, to interviewing Rail Minister Huw Merriman, and then on to Rail's rail plan announcement on Thursday, with a stack of media interviews for both of us in amongst all that lot. So 4 shows in a week. I think that's pretty good going.
It certainly was. It was completely mad. I mean, it was exciting, and there was, as you say, there was an awful lot going on. If you haven't watched the Philip Rutnam interview, definitely do that. Quite a few people said, "Oh, I wasn't really going to watch that," but I'm ever so glad I did. And also the special we did on Labour's policy announcement, which we'll talk a bit about in this show. They were both, both fun to do, quite different, but I think, really good. And all the links are on YouTube if you want to start getting up to speed on those.
Yeah, I had a few people saying they weren't that bothered about Philip Rutnam's interview, and I think that's because maybe they were making a bit of a prejudgment about civil servant and he wouldn't be that interested, and he actually was very, because he was very badly treated by the government at the end, wasn't he, when he was at the Home Office? So he's quite outspoken, I thought, for a civil servant. We also want to say a massive thank you to 2 very kind YouTube viewers who left us super thanks following that special show. Rob Staffordian on YouTube and Ben and Sophie Patterson. So thanks very much to all of you for your kindness and support. And they aren't just words. We do always take the time to thank viewers personally when they leave us a super thanks, and it means a lot to us. Thank you. Now, as we said, it was a big week for railways last week, railway politics too, not least because we interviewed our highest profile guest to date, Rail Minister and HS2 Minister Huw Merriman. We'd said on a previous show that he'd agreed to join us, and we were delighted when his office invited us to film it in person at his office at Great Minster House at the DFT. It was quite the eye-opener, wasn't it, Richard?
It was actually. What was really interesting about this, we obviously tweeted about this yesterday to say that we were doing, we'd done the interview with Huw Merriman, and it generated a lot of chatter, including from a large number of people who've clearly already decided what we were going to ask him and what he was going to say. Hopefully, when people watched it, they saw it was actually, it was pretty challenging. I mean, you're never going to agree with everything, and because we didn't, right? And you've also got to bear in mind that, our style has always been, we give the interviewee the chance to sort of say their piece to agree. We did it with Mick Whelan, we'd do it with Huw Merriman, but it was good. I mean, there's quite a lot I didn't agree with.
Yep.
But there was an awful lot I did, so that there's balance. I mean, for instance, we talked about HS2, and that was the first thing we talked about. And on that, I thought it was quite interesting. He talked about the fact that people in government had misgivings for quite a lot longer than perhaps publicly had been said. Now, you could say, well, that's not being very transparent then. I thought he was pretty straightforward about that. But you asked him about land sales and safeguarding, and I personally saw a chink of light in that. I heard somebody who I felt wasn't as entirely comfortable with that particular decision as perhaps others in government. He certainly suggested, well, it could easily be reversed. But he did also talk about Euston and made a commitment there. So, I think although we don't agree with the decision, there were some reasons, I think, to have a degree of optimism about some of the things that are happening on HS2.
Well, when you put it to him that it would be mad, or daft or bonkers or whatever word we use, daft, I think.
Pejorative word, yeah.
I think it was daft to end HS2 at Old Oak. I was surprised with the enthusiasm, clarity and promptness with which he said, no, we're going to Euston. And he made clear, because I remember saying to him, well, what, complete with all the grade separated junction outside so you can turn the trains around and you got full flexibility. Yes, that he was quite clear, wasn't he?
He was. Now, the cynic will say, oh, yeah, well, he is going to commit to all that, isn't he? Because, let's face it, he's not going to be the rail minister for that much longer, which is, well, we don't know, do we? I mean, we've said loads of times there's an awful lot can happen between now and then. But he said what he thought on that, which I thought was quite good. I tell you one subject that I thought was fascinating was the discussion on Network North. Now, I have to say, he didn't convince me on that, that it is a coherent strategic alternative to HS2. I think there's some very good things in the Network North pot, by the way, but there are individual things that I think quite good, some of them quite big, but it's not and for me, it's never been an alternative to HS2. But it was interesting. Two things he said, which I thought were fascinating. One, that clearly they'd been thinking about it for quite some time, longer than I think any of us first thought. I think we all thought it had been cobbled up over a weekend. I don't think it had. But the other thing that was fascinating was we put to him what Bernadette Kelly had said. Everything is subject to business cases, so really nothing's promised until any of that's done. And he said, no, the money is committed. And we pushed him on it and said, are you saying that the Treasury have committed, properly committed to fund this? You just need to catch up with the paperwork. I'm slightly summarising. And he said, yes. And I've got to say that I wasn't expecting that as an answer. Now, Labour, if they do get into power, could change all that clearly, but that was quite the statement.
There again, it's not unusual for a government that suspects it's outgoing to lay a few difficulties for an incoming government, isn't it? So to commit to Euston and all the rest of it is can make life a bit difficult for Labour if they decide they don't want to do that.
I guess so, but you'd have to be a bit daft not to see Euston is the only logical thing to do with HS2 having built phase one. There was one interesting moment where we put him on the spot around the
Dore and Totley.
About Dore and Totley, and said, you cannot claim that this was Network North. And he said, no, you're right. Shouldn't have said that. That was confusing. Now, I get, we're balanced and fair on this program. I mean, we were chatting about it afterwards, and he did point out that actually some of the other stuff that is planned for the Hope Valley Light electrification and so on is part of Network North. But he didn't back away from saying, no, I shouldn't, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have said that. And which I thought was actually quite good of him. It was the right thing to do, wasn't it?
How often do you get politicians saying I was wrong? Not that often.
No.
So,
no, you don't.
A definite sort of hat tip to him for that. Rail reform?
Yeah.
I didn't think his answers on that were that brilliant.
No, I mean, we possibly, with hindsight, could have been a bit tougher on that. We were getting towards the end and we'd slightly outstayed our welcome, I think. But we asked him why, whether it was going to happen before the general election. And the answer was to tell us how much he enjoyed doing the job, which was really the answer to a different question, really. But so I thought that was a bit wishy-washy, although we talked about ORR and he accepted that in a new world, whether it's this government's model for Great British Railways, or even more so if it's the Labour model, but even under this government's model, the role of the ORR is very different. It has to be very different. We don't need that kind of privatised, world model. So that was quite good. But no, rail reform wasn't the strongest. And I also think he was a bit sort of, I don't know if evasive is the right word, but he didn't really get stuck in on the industrial relations stuff either. But
and as you say, we were coming towards the end there. We didn't really have the time, did we, to completely get stuck into that, maybe as thoroughly as we might have done.
No, but what did come shining through was a genuine interest and love for the railway, and that was you can't really fake that. And I don't think he was. I think that was real, which was good.
Described himself as a railway obsessive.
Yeah, I thought that was only what you and I kind of did. So that was great. And I know this might sound a bit sort of, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to come across actually, but I genuinely enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah.
He was, there was real energy. He didn't really. He was happy to talk about anything, and I suspect we could have spent a lot longer. And hopefully, what do you think? I think we should see if we can do a sort of a follow up.
I think so, and also he was very keen, wasn't he, to get across that he was prepared to engage. He must have said twice, if not three times, when we asked him a question, I will get back to that, I will answer that, but I just want to say this, which is what politicians normally do, and then never get back to that. Yeah. But he absolutely did. He definitely engaged with the process. He was good-humoured. And that isn't always the case.
No.
And so, yeah, I mean, maybe we should get a valedictory interview out of him if they do lose it.
Gosh, yeah, okay. I think one of the things that I have learned in the last sort of 6 or 8 months since I've sort of been reconnecting with all this a lot more is when you go around and chat to people, they'll mutter all sorts of dark things about, this government and what Rishi Sunak's dislike of trains and what Mark Harper has or hasn't done, or strikes, whatever. But pretty much everybody in the industry says, but Hugh's a really good guy. He kind of gets it. And he's made the effort to get out and meet people and talk. And so you may not agree with what he says or what he thinks or what he's done or what he hasn't done, but you definitely can't say that he hasn't sought to engage and learn and all that kind of stuff. And I think that is great.
That is to his credit. Yeah. You asked him in the IR section, I thought it was a really good question, actually. He said, look, it's just irrelevant whose fault it is. No, it just needs to be sorted out, doesn't it? We're hearing from Aslef that, there hasn't been a meeting since last April or whatever. And he gave a very careful answer, didn't he? I thought there's some lines to read between. And he said, I think there's more conversations going on than you'd maybe imagine. And I think they said they haven't been in the room. He was my reading of it is that he was saying there's actually been quite a lot of informal meetings going on, but they're not minuted, which means that it's possible for people to say there hasn't been a meeting when actually there has. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's possible. I don't honestly know, but I think he was right to say that on some subjects there's a danger of saying things that can make them worse. Now, that won't please a lot of the people who will have been listening from a certain point of view, and I'm sure our comment bag will reflect that. And that's fine. That's great. That's the point of these shows, is to get some debate going, and people don't have to agree with everything we say. Well, they clearly don't, so that's fine. But I don't know. Look, overall, I thought it was open, it was candid, and in many respects, I thought we learned a great deal, and I hope people approach it with an open mind. That's all.
So do I, but I think you're right. We probably will get it in the neck. But there you go. Excuse me. Shall we move on?
I think we should.
Okay. So if you haven't watched it or listened to the Huw interview yet, there's a link in the description if you're on YouTube, and you can find the audio version on whatever platform you're listening on. And I think, and I know Richard agrees, it's a really important listen. And I actually urge all green signallers to set aside an hour for it. And do let us know what you think in the comments, even if you disagree with the minister. In fact, let us know, especially if you disagree with him or us, come to that. But can I make, on behalf of all three of us at Green Signal, Can we have constructive and civil comments, please? Hugh's a regular listening to the show, as you'll have guessed, when you listen to our interview with him. So it's an important way of feeding back reasonable views. But he's human like anybody else. He's not going to listen if all he hears is a load of name calling and shouting, isn't he? Now, let's move on to the other huge thing that happened this last week. Labour finally unveiled its plan for the railway if it wins the fast approaching general election, as the smart money suggests that it will, not to mention the opinion polls, they're in no doubt. Now, in general, I've seen a lot of supportive comments about Labour's plans, including from many in the industry. And on our special show last week, you were pretty positive as well, Richard, as was I. Are you still of the same mind a week or so later? I am, definitely.
Yeah. And, I've reflected on a lot of what people say. There's a fair amount of sort of slightly cynical and skeptical comment. That's fine. I mean, good to challenge. But I remain positive, I think, for two principal reasons, right? First of all, I think it's pragmatic. Right? I think this plan is pragmatic. It does build on the analysis that underpinned the Keith Williams review. I know we're supposed to call it William Shapps. I can't quite bring myself to do that.
No, we're not doing that.
The Keith Williams review. And actually, Keith came out and said as
in
much.
Support.
He did, which was very clever, right, of Labour. Keeps the same name, Great British Railways. Keeps the headquarters in Derby. That'll keep them happy. It's not ideologically obsessed.
And that's what impressed me, to be honest.
Well, we'll come on to that with some of the comments that were made about it, because I think there are some people who were cross because it wasn't ideologically pure. But so it wasn't that. It was, we'll do what we think works. If it's public, it's good. And if it's private, it's good. We'll do what we think works. So that's the first reason, it's pragmatic. The second reason is because of the section on urgent action, right?
Which you have been banging on about for a long time.
And I haven't changed my view on that, right? I don't think Labour will be judged on how well they organise the statutory role of devolved nations or metropolitan mayors into local rail service planning over a 5-year time horizon. I think they'll be judged on whether in the next 3, 6, 9 or 12 months, some basic stuff starts to turn around and get sorted. Right?
Yeah, just make it better.
Make it better. And it can be, right? It can be. This is not homespun nonsense. It can be, but it requires a certain approach, quite a directive approach, that word again. And that is in this plan, right? And it's there on, I can't remember what page it is, but it's an urgent plan for action. So I think that's really good, and actually Dominic O'Connell, the excellent business editor, I think of Times Radio, he writes for the Times and the Sunday Times, wrote a great piece actually at the end of last week and said exactly that. That's what they'll be judged on. So I think it's really for those two reasons and lots of other stuff besides, recognising there's loads of detail still to be worked out. I think it's a good plan.
Well, at this stage, we're still talking about the big principles and strategic objectives, and we'll get on the detail as it emerges. But that shadow group to start on day one, I think, is a very important aspect, and Dominic's right about that. So we thought it would be useful if we look this time at some of the things that have been said in the media, so we can do a bit of a mythbuster maybe, because there were some inevitable knee-jerk, brackets crazy, reactions to what was said. Some of them probably intentional, and we can also talk a bit about some of the public's views, what we've seen from them. So how about a bit of a mythbuster? Because we're absolutely not the Labour Party's comms department, and there's a heck of a lot of the details still to emerge. So some of the scepticism may yet prove well-founded. We shall have to see, and we will keep our fingers on the pulse. Oh, my goodness, but plenty of daft things have been said as well, so we thought we'd sift through a few of them. So here's our top 5 knee-jerk reactions and headlines, and we'll ponder whether they're fair comment or not. So, train tickets will probably get more expensive. Unlikely they'll get any cheaper. The Guardian asked the question. The Telegraph said while Labour's plan to revive British Rail won't bring down ticket prices, The Today programme, I thought, gave Louise Haig an unreasonably hard time on that. They must have asked her 20 times if she'd rule out fare increases, which is balmy, isn't it? Because fares are always going to go up at some point. It's an unreasonable thing to want. So what do you think about that one?
Yeah, well, I listened to the Today interview. I just find that whole almost like shouting and talking across people style, which is so prevalent these days, really irritating. Actually, it doesn't actually tell you anything. You don't learn anything. They do it with everybody sometimes, and I just find that a bit irritating, really. So yeah, that was their focus, was about fares. I think fares reform really is first and foremost about making it simpler and more transparent and more logical. It's not the same thing as making it cheaper, right? What we do know is that the fares system is really difficult to penetrate sometimes. And there's some things where you just kind of go, am I getting the right price or not? And then you learn sort of ways round it, like split ticketing and all that kind of stuff.
The dig cut dodge.
The dig cut dodge, which I think was a phrase coined by Simon Calder, actually. But anyway, it's true. I've tried it and it works. So that is, I think, the point of this. Fares reform is first and foremost about making it logical and simpler and more transparent and fair, which is why I like the best price guarantee. I like the harmonisation of delay repay.
An automatic delay repay.
Yeah, exactly. And on day one, if you did change the fare system, I think Mark Smith, when he was on this show, was talking about this. He said, your clear objective is to make it revenue neutral day one. You don't want to end up losing money if you're the government, because we all know there's only two sources. And if if the fares box goes down, then subsidy has to go up. And that's probably not, it's already much higher than it's been in recent years. So it's all about simplicity to begin with, I think, and in that there inevitably will be some winners and losers. I mean, Huw Merriman said the same on the interview with him. So I don't think she could, or they can confirm that for some people they might not go up a bit, but that does not mean it isn't the right thing to do to reform fares, because it clearly is.
I thought she handled that Today onslaught with quite graciously. Interestingly, the minister also referenced the LNER trial, didn't he? And I don't know whether he was sending a message here, but he said there is no requirement in that trial to increase revenues.
Yeah, and he said he did say that, which was interesting. I mean, I think people will pick up on that. But look, the best way to increase the total take from fares is to grow the railway, get more people travelling, right?
Yeah.
So we're back. We're kind of circular thing back to our performance thing again. But look, on fares, yeah, I thought the headlines. It was inevitable. You can't guarantee they won't go up. No, but I can say that we're going to make it simpler and fairer and more logical. Yeah.
Okay, myth number two. Well, not myth number two. Knee-jerk.
Yeah, they're not really myths.
No, they're knee-jerk.
I thought your knee-jerk reaction point was a really good one. They might not be myths. That's a problem.
And I got fed up of hearing this from all sorts of people. Labour is going to renationalise the railway or the passenger railway within 5 years. The BBC said that Labour pledges to renationalise most rail services within 5 years. My argument is, apart from open access, they already are. The Evening Standard asked what rail renationalisation means, which I thought was quite a savvy question because they clearly didn't know themselves. Politics Home, Labour says its plan to nationalise the railways will save over £2 billion a year. I'm not sure about that. And the FT said Labour plans to retain key private sector role in Britain's nationalised railways, which of course is true. So go on then, have a go at that lot.
Well, I think you've kind of put your finger right on it, really, which is, well, look around you, right? In terms of where we've been the last few years. I mean, funnily enough, the one word you won't find in that Labour Party document is nationalised. Apart from when they explain that's what they're not doing.
Not what they're doing, yeah.
Now, and that was a bit political, right? Because in reality, it is. I mean, the bringing the train companies all of them under the warm embrace of the public sector. I mean, to all practical purposes, yeah, you can see why people would say that. But the whole nationalised narrative, I think, was just, that was I think what the media were trying to do there is get people all thinking about, 1970s and, bins piling up in the streets and dodgy catering and all the rest of it. It was trying to paint a picture.
I think there's another aspect to that as well, is that they're tuning into what they believe is a massive public dissatisfaction with the railways, that only nationalisation can put it right, from these privateers sucking profits.
What you think the media are saying that?
Well, I think that's the interest that they're playing to. Because Mick Lynch certainly doesn't need any encouragement to talk about the money being leached out of the system by, say, the Roscoes by the billion.
No, but again, I suppose we're back to the point about, this plan is really about being pragmatic and trying to get the best of sort of both worlds where it makes sense. But you can understand why the train operators, yes, they will, if this plan is implemented in how it's sort of set out, then private sector roles in running train companies will, diminish very significantly.
But it is only a role, Richard, isn't it? I mean, one of the things which came across to me incredibly powerfully over 2 days of, 10, 12 various radio and TV interviews was the incredible ignorance among the media about the fact that the passenger service itself has always been publicly owned, and it is only its operation that's been carried out by the private sector. Other than open access, our passenger railway has always been nationalised. And that was a genuine point of surprise.
I think that's a bit of a stretch. I think if you look at what happened in the late 90s, is it? I mean,
well, the service itself, it's parcelled up and handed out for operation.
Yeah, but there was a lot more.
But it's owned by the public.
The right to award a franchise, definitely, yeah, I agree. But in terms of service planning, I think there's a lot that happened, and we'll come on to this when we talk about, what did privatisation ever do for us? There's a lot about service planning that was very much, I think it was sort of driven by the operators and not necessarily by, I can tell you now, when I was at Virgin, I don't think we saw anybody from the department for months after months after months, right? So I'm not sure I quite go as far as you, but I do take the point. Certainly since COVID, that has absolutely been the case. Yeah, no doubt about that.
And there'd be contracts, they're not, and yet you still hear people, even on other podcasts, talking about the franchise passenger network, which it hasn't been for 4 years now.
No, it's just inaccurate, isn't it? But I think the thing that's fascinating about all of this, which is why really the nationalisation thing is sort of the wrong thing to focus on, the bit that this plan talks about, and indeed, the government's plan talked about, is getting this away from a central government run, sort of contract management team inside the DfT into an operationally independent, arm's length organisation that will handle the day to day. That
is crucial.
Is actually kind of the opposite of nationalisation in a way. That is empowering the railway to do what it does, and that's why we should be happy with all these plans. Really, if they do that alone, that's a massive step.
And the press release that came out the day before the plan actually said that in as many words, didn't it? With the control of the railway by railway professionals, not Whitehall.
Yeah.
So they've clearly cottoned on to that, and you're right. It is the reverse. As I put it in most interviews, if we've got GBR run ideally, for me, by Andrew Haynes, can say to the government, what sort of railway do you want and how much are you prepared to pay for it? And with those 2 questions answered, thank you, retreat to Whitehall. We will now deliver that as best we can without any interference. And that is going to be fundamentally important. That operational arm's length relationship, if that doesn't happen, this will not work.
Yes, I think the only nuance to that will be it requires a very good ongoing and mature relationship, because there's a serious possibility that a politician will say, I would like a Rolls Royce, but I only want to pay Toyota Aygo money, right? Oh, hang on a minute. Those 2 things don't reconcile. So you can't have all of that railway for that amount of money. There's a debate that goes, and that requires an iterative and ongoing relationship. But you're spot on, Nigel. The operational day-to-day stuff, they've got to keep out of that, because it just goes wrong if they don't.
And it's much more likely to deliver what they want and need, if they let the professionals get on with it who understand what they are doing.
All the evidence of when that's been allowed to happen suggests that is correct. Yes. Yeah.
All right. So, shall we move on again?
I think we should.
This nationalisation doesn't go far enough because privatisation never did anything for the railway. I heard that several times from some commentators, and it wasn't responsible for passenger growth. I heard that several times too. We need to take everything back in-house for it to be a proper renationalisation. Well, I was brand new on rail when all this happened, and I've got two memories of what I saw as radical changes with the operators. One was when Richard Brown was running Midland Main Line. Within a month of that being signed, they launched what they described as a foresight ticket. 4 people from the East Midlands to London for 30 quid. And they advertised it on TV. And for me, that was revelatory. It was the first time that the railway had acknowledged, because back then 30 quid was about the price of a tank of petrol, so for 4 people. And it worked, it filled the trains. But a far more power was I had a ringside seat to what the amazing Christopher Garnett and his team did on GNER, in taking Intercity East Coast and absolutely transforming its image, its customer service. All of a sudden, train crews look more like air crews at an airport with the bags and that going to the trains, and everything about GNER just spoke real quality, and the numbers boomed. Are we really meant to believe that the private sector played no part in that and it just happened? What about Virgin, Richard? 15 million people on the West Coast to 30 and then 40. I remember at a breakfast at the Ibis Hotel in Euston, before the Pendolinos were built, when Branson said to me, to make this work, Nigel, we have to double passengers from 15 to 30 million. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that's a stretch. So talk us through how Virgin and privatisation didn't have an impact on that.
Oh, well, it didn't, did it? It was all down to the economy.
Well.
Oh, sorry, hang on. Right. Look, the view that a number of people have been adopting over the past few days is that it's all down. There's an R squared equals 1 correlation coefficient, right, between the GDP growth and ridership on the railways. Right? That's the view.
Well, there always had been.
Well, there's a very, very strong relationship, right? So the big question is, what did privatization enable? Was it anything or nothing? I suppose in answer to your question about Virgin, I go back to that. And what I remember, having been there in the room a lot over a sustained period of time, was the coming together of 2 different worlds, right? And they were 2 very different worlds. You imagine a room where you've got Chris Green, Ivor Warburton, Chris Gibb, people like that who knew more about, they've forgotten more than I'll ever know about sort of some of the day-to-day
railway titans.
Absolutely, top people. And then at the same time, and these names may not mean quite as much to people listening to this, but the likes of Jim Steer, who was sort of strategy genius, really, Patrick McCall, who was a guy with a very, very strong finance background, went on to be Richard Branson's right-hand man, really, for 20 years, actually, the Virgin Group, me, others, right? We all had very different backgrounds. And I think that the coming together of those 2 worlds created more than the sum of the parts.
That's really interesting, because Graham Eccles, I've never thought of that before.
Sorry. Oh, my God, I'll be in real trouble now. And obviously, Graham Eccles was part of that
made
Virgin
the same
team,
point on Twitter, which really struck me. I mean, I hadn't genuinely thought of this, that he said he learned a massive amount from sitting round the table with the commercial people that you talked about, and that it all really worked and ignited a bigger than the sum of its parts growth for the railway, which... makes sense, doesn't it? You've got good commercial people and good operational people. And
we should get Chris on the show, Chris Green on the show at some point, and maybe even Chris Garnett, right? And actually ask them, right? Say, do you think that you could have done all of this with your background in BR on its own? And I think I know the answer, but let's get them on and ask that question. some will say, oh, well, okay, if it was so marvellous, why is it not worked? Why has it failed? Why is it not going to be the model going forward? And I think that part of the answer to that, if not a lot of the answer to that, is it is currently at a point where it needs a different kind of fix.
Times have changed.
And times have changed. And also, in a world when the Spectator and the New Statesman actually agree on a point, you know that something's gone a bit odd, right? And they agreed that the one thing that you can say about Labour's rail policy, whether you believe it's not radical enough or it's just back to the bad old days, it is going to be popular. And I think that just the general, zeitgeist is this private model. We just don't want it at the moment or whatever.
And yet, Louise made clear that there is a significant role for the private sector in freight and the Roscoes.
Because that's just pragmatic and sensible, right? What I've been really surprised about, Nigel, you kind of alluded to it when you were just sort of setting the scene for this, is just the venom. It's just like, no, we cannot accept that privatisation.
It's almost like this, isn't it? We don't want the private sector.
It is like, get the garlic out. Why? It's almost like, unless we win this ideological battle 10-0 and we kind of crush any memory of this, we haven't won. And you kind of go, well, I'll tell you what, you've never watched Blackburn Rovers play, if that's the case. I mean, if we win 3-2, we don't care that we let 2 in.
A win is a win.
A win is a win. I don't get that. And this just kind of froth. I tell you what, it reminded me of that scene. If you ever watch, you must have watched Life of Brian, right?
Oh, God,
and there's that brilliant scene when they're debating, what did the Romans ever do for us? And there's that great thing where
Reg heating says, and water and...
Yeah, he goes, no, Reg says, all right, apart from sanitation, medicine, education, wine, public order, irrigation, roads, the freshwater system and public health, apart from that, what did the Romans ever do for us, right? And it's a little bit like this debate that's on a privatisation. Just leave it, right? Those of us who were actually there, as opposed to commentating on it, those of us who were actually there know it was those two worlds coming together. But it doesn't matter. It's what we're going to do now that matters.
That's right. But a lot of venom in particular, and venom is the right word. I was quite sort of disappointed that a community which I'm normally proud to be a part of descended into such nastiness, I suppose, because you're never going to win an argument with nastiness, are you?
No.
And particularly, do you want to just deal briefly with the Roscoe's point? The Roscoe's particularly got some commentators. This will never work until we get the Roscoe's back in house.
Yeah, I don't really understand this one. And actually, so seriously, this is not trying to be sort of clever or anything. If anybody can, offer an alternative for why what I'm about to say is not right, I mean, seriously, all ears. But this idea that you've got, unless you nationalise those, you've not got something that was. Why practically would you do it? Okay, so let's the rolling stock itself is now privately owned. Legal title sits with these Roscoe's. You may not think it should have ever been allowed to happen that way.
But we are where we are.
Right? So I'm assuming that these people who want these Roscoe's renationalised are not suggesting we go and nick these assets. I mean, it'd be like me saying, I really like your house, Nigel, right? I'm going to have your house. I'm not going to pay you for anything for it.
Assets,
yeah, I'm not. If you could just move out next week, I'm going to move in and you're not getting any compensation yet. That's just mad. So let's just hope that they don't think that, right? What they think is we're going to buy the contracts out. Well, why would you do that? Because I think there is a myth, there's a genuine myth here that these Roscoe's have spent nothing on these old trains that they inherited. What absolute nonsense. They've spent an absolute fortune on some of these trains, on many of these trains. And those have a book value. They've got an asset value. So you'd have to buy that, or you'd have to buy the rental stream of whatever's contracted for. So why do that? Why accelerate a capital payment now when you can just pay for it?
Money.
Now, if you want new trains to be ordered from in a different way, well, that's okay. That's a different matter, right? but there's no financial sense doing this. So there is a reason, ladies and gentlemen, why virtually every car sold in this country now, or the vast majority of them, are all on these PCP plans, because people actually want to pay a smaller monthly rental. And they accept there's going to be a residual value or a sort of a bullet payment at the end. But you wouldn't go, do you know what? I've now decided I'm just going to pay it all off. What benefit is there to that?
It's because it's ideological, isn't it?
I think it must be, but it doesn't make any financial sense to me.
No, it absolutely doesn't, does it? I remember Hayden Abbott, who was the MD of Angel Trains many years ago, to your point about not investing in stock, was talking about renewing the lease on the Chiltern fleet for Shooter. And he said, we're not charging any more for it, and yet we've done air conditioning, we've done that. And he rhymed off a whole load of stuff that they'd upgrade and put into that fleet, but they were just charging the same for it. So it was kind of free to the industry. Look, I mean, I have no idea. Have you got a ballpark figure, as putting your accountant's hat on? If they wanted to acquire the Roscoes, what sort of money you'd be looking at?
I haven't looked at the balance sheet, so I don't know. I mean,
many billions, though.
A very big number, which you don't need to do. No. Just carry on paying the rentals. You can't. You've either got to pay them out, or you've just carry on paying the rentals. You can't just take the assets off them. That's not how this works, right? So I don't know. I just think it's just one of the. You're right. It's ideologically pure, but I think it's a bit bonkers as well, unless I've missed something.
I mean, that was one of the aspects, this pragmatism, that really impressed me about the Labour plan. I was, as you know, beforehand, I was fairly sceptical. And yet when I read it, that's exactly what I was impressed with. Well, we'll keep it to the private sector where it suits us, and we'll do this and we'll do that. And, the lack of dogma, political dogma throughout the report, or the plan, was really good. So, right, where's the money going to come from, this plan, says the sceptics. It's, quote, unfunded. And actually, this is where I thought the government's response was a bit stupid, when it said it was pointless and unfunded, because, they're doing largely what the government was going to do. So was that going to be pointless as well? So.
Yeah. So this is number 4, isn't it? The unfunded.
Sorry, I just skittered on then without.
No, you're right. It was a bit. It was a strange comment. Look, you know me. I mean, you sometimes accuse me of being Victor Meldrew. I can have a pretty miserable outlook on things.
I've never really noticed that.
Really? Okay, right, fair enough. Must just be me being sensitive then. I mean, if I always get given a plan, I normally halve the revenue and double the cost, and then see if it still works, right? Because that way you're never disappointed, or you're less disappointed when it goes wrong. Even I, right, Mr. Miserable, look at this and go, I don't see what the massive incremental cost is that sits in Labour's plan to the government's plan. They're both going to create Great British Railways. In fact, the government's already been pretty much slapped on the wrist pretty strong by the NAO for spending a whole load of money on Great British Railways and not having an awful lot to show for it. So where's the difference there? I can't see a material difference there. There's going to be some new organisations, but they're actually a consolidation rather than something extra. If you're not going to do the Roscoes, for the reasons we've just said, where does the huge amount of money come from? I don't really see it, and I kind of asked myself the question a lot: am I just being naive? But I don't actually really see it on this occasion. So, even you let the contracts expire, and there's no compensation to pay; they just expired,
and that's it. And then you bring them in. What about what happens in the meantime? I haven't actually looked, and I suppose I should have done. What is going to be the last private operator to turn the lights out, and when is it?
Is it East Midlands Rail? It might just be.
It feels as though it might be, but is it a concern that they're going to just get bored and lose interest now, and the service will go backwards?
Yeah, that comment's been made by a number of people. That I think maybe that could lead to what was it Peter Parker once famously said? The crumbling edge of quality. I mean, it's pretty grim at the moment, really, in so many respects. But okay, there is a risk I suspect that people kind of lose focus. When you've decided you got a new job and you're going to move, your mind inevitably goes.
Once your mind's gone, your body has to
Yeah.
follow, doesn't it?
But I think that's about management and leadership and having a vision, and the leadership is going to be the key in all of this, right?
So
That's vital.
let me extend that question then. Is it likely that these owning groups are going to say this is pointless and just hand the keys back anyway? Get out early?
Don't know. I mean, look, they're earning whatever it is, 1.82%. It's not actually taking that much risk. I don't know. I think these early conversations are going to be vital. Rail partners, made their position fairly clear, I thought, on the announcement, and said, look, we all agree that we need some change. We just think that with the private sector, we bear down on cost. We've got all of the commercial acumen that we bring and all the rest of it. And they're absolutely entitled to that view. And, there's the best things all have an element of truth about them, right? So this is not going to be entirely straightforward. I don't know, Nigel. I mean, I think that we'll have to see that on how that plays out. But it does come back to that energy, right? Is it
going to have it? I mean, is it going to have it in the new order of things? I mean, maybe I'm just a bit of a cynic, but I look at anything that the government runs and it just never does a great job on it.
It's down to people. It's down to people again,
but
right?
if you can't get the right people, I just
well, there are some great people. We've said loads of times, LNER, right? It's in the public sector. Why does it work? Great leader and great leadership. So it's not easy, but I genuinely think leadership and energy are the most crucial things. That's why I really like that step one, plan for urgent action, but it does need resourcing. Yeah.
We shall see, won't we? Let's move on. This is neither radical nor a plan, and it's lacking in any real substance.
Well, this is number 5, isn't it? This is the last one. Well, this is the one where it was quite interesting because the Spectator said, back to the bad old days of it's not really a plan. And then the New Statesman said, well, is it radical enough? But they both agreed it was going to be fairly popular, which I thought was quite interesting. Kate Andrews was writing in the Spectator. I think she normally writes really good stuff, but I felt it was a bit sort of cliche after cliche that was getting trotted out. She did manage to avoid curly sandwiches, but I wonder whether it was in the first draft of the piece. It was a bit sort of cliche driven. I mean, the irony is in the Spectator, she talks about Labour creating a quango called Great British Railways. Well, that's what the government's doing as well. And she also had a right go at the Passenger Standards Authority, which actually is a consolidation of what's already there and arguably may well be more efficient as a result. Look, I think this does come back to, we've now sounding like a bit of a crack record. They won't be judged in this plan on what it delivers in years 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. I think they'll be judged on whether they can make a difference pretty short term.
In the first
quickly.
6 months, what can they make? So people say, well, this is looking better already. That's
the key, right? And at that point, I think people will care less whether it was radical or whatever. Do you know, we both did quite a bit of media on the day. I did the Nicky Campbell show on 5 Live. And so you get to listen to what the public think.
Well, you were back and forth. Talked to a few members of the public, and I think you did about 4 segments.
Or something like that.
And he kept coming back to ask what you thought. I thought it was good.
It was fun. And the common thread was, I don't really care who runs it. I just want it to work. Yeah. So if you can do that, I think then it's an upward rising thing.
Well, we shall wait to see what further detail emerges from Labour.
Yeah.
Maybe even through an interview with Louise Haigh on Green Signals. Who's to say?
Look, it would be great. I think at some point it would be great to have a chat with the Labour team because I think they've got a lot to. Say, and there are still some questions. So that would be good.
Okie dokie. Well, that is about it, really, isn't it? We move to the highlight of your show each week, where you can limber up the grey cells and show us what a smart arse you are. The quiz.
What? So are you talking to me?
I am.
Oh, right. Oh, the quiz. That's a bit harsh. Right. Okay. Well, we'll move on to the quiz then. Well, last week was a bit of a head scratcher for some, I think, because there were an extraordinary number of suggested answers for this one.
Alternative facts, as they used to say in the US.
Alternative facts. Right. Well, just to remind everybody what the question was. The question was, I said, the following places, Crewe, York, Derby, Swindon and Brighton, all had great railway workshops, but which was the odd one out and why? And I jotted down some of the answers. They're brilliant. Richard Barrow said Crewe because they'd cast anchors in LNWR days. Right? Wow. Mr. David HT said Crewe because the other towns existed before the arrival of the railways. I thought it was a good one.
That's not a bad answer, that.
Oh, there was some great answers. I'm always blown away by how much stuff people know. Madelay01 said Brighton because they ended up building Isetta bubble cars. Stephen Davis, Silk Moth 6316, and a couple of others said Brighton because it was never a BREL, a British Rail Engineering Limited Works. Good one.
There you go.
Tony Gillett and
correct but wrong.
Well, Tony Gillett and a guy called, or somebody said, at just some northerner, said Derby because it's the only one building trains, which I thought was quite ironic. This one was great. Scott Turner said Derby because it's the only town without mainline electrification. That was a good one. Right?
Oh, really?
Quite a few people said York because the rest built locomotives and York only had a carriage works.
Carriage works, yeah.
Yeah. And actually at 796, Karen said York because they never built any locos unless this question is as duff as your district council question, which I thought, ouch.
Oh,
yeah.
Harsh.
Yeah, it was harsh. It was also correct because I had not realised that Richmondshire had been amalgamated into North Yorkshire about 12 months ago. So technically that wasn't quite, I mean, fortunately nobody got it anyway, but there you go. So that was a bit harsh, even if it was true. I have to say that the answer is York, but not for any reason given. However, I've been a bit soft this week. The reason why it's not for any answer given is because it's the only one that is in the county town of the county in which it's located. So York is in North Yorkshire. Swindon is in Wiltshire, but it's not the county town. That's Trowbridge. Derby's in Derbyshire, but it's not the county town. Matlock is. And so on and so forth. So that was... Bowker. It was the answer, but I thought, do you know what? That's going to wind everybody up. And I thought, if you said York, because it was the only one that had a carriage works, not a loco works, I thought, actually, do you know what? That's fair enough. So that's the answer. We're going to let York be the answer. And the first person to get it right was Derek Gibson. So well done on getting York for that reason. And if you drop us a line on info@greensignals.org, we will get your mug on its way to you. You see, all heart there. Did you notice that?
Richard, you're the nicest bloke.
I am. All right. Yeah, you're the only person that's ever said that, but thank you. So on to this week's question. Made this one a little bit easier. My local constituency in the next general election is actually a new seat, I think, actually Melksham and Devizes. The current MP for Devizes is Danny Kruger, who has a most curious connection to the railways.
I'm intrigued.
What is it?
I have no idea.
There you go. Right. So the current MP for Devizes is Danny Kruger, who has a most curious connection to the railways. What is it? If you think you know, which Nigel clearly doesn't, if you think you know...
I have absolutely no idea.
All right, it's a good one, this. You will like this one. Answers in the usual way, Twitter, email, whatever. And first one to get it right gets a mug.
Right. Well, let us move on. Last week on the show, we mentioned it was Railway Family Week, which was an RBF, Rail Benefit Fund initiative to raise awareness and support for a charity. Well, we have another exciting piece of good news from RBF this week, haven't we, Richard?
Well, we have, and this one's good. So, Railway Benefit Fund, just remind us, everybody, what that actually is. It's kind of the rail industry's charity. It supports current, former and retired rail workers to improve their financial well-being. They've been around since 1858. They rely solely on fundraising. And we're going to get Joe Kay, the CEO, on the show at some point to just chat a bit about it, because it's really quite moving stuff. I mean, the number of current railway people who rely upon it is quite surprising. So we'll get John to talk about that. But one of the things they're doing, because they rely solely on fundraising, they've got a great trip planned. It's a charter train. It's called the Bucket and Spade Charity Charter. It's on Wednesday, the 5th of June. It starts from the charity's home in Crewe, picking up at Warrington Bank Quay, Manchester Victoria, our old stamping ground, I think, really.
Indeed.
And heading to Scarborough for a day at the seaside, or you can alight at York and have the day there if you prefer. We'll stick all the ticket details on our website, on our blog page, so you can find out how to book a ticket if you fancy it. All the proceeds go to the fund. I think LSL have been incredibly generous as well. There's a fabulous sounding option that involves a full English breakfast and a 3-course supper on the way home. And the absolute pièce de resistance for me is that it's going to be Class 40 hauled. It's not one of the...
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, it's not one of the CFPS locos. It's 40013 or D213 is its current guise, and Dania. It looks absolutely superb. I've actually even been to Scarborough on it before, and it was a great day out. So this is a fantastic thing. You definitely worth supporting. I think there's still some tickets left, so get on and support it. Have a day out behind a 40 and do a really great thing for a really great cause.
Well, it's good to see you so excited about something, Richard. I have to say, relishing the idea of an English breakfast and a 3-course supper. I've never heard that expression before. 3-course dinner, maybe, but a 3-course supper sounds a bit novel. And a bit of English electric whistling. I guess it's got to be Mark 1, so you can crack the windows open and hear all that. Will you be going?
That's my current plan.
A definite maybe then.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, open the windows in a manner which is consistent with the safety regulations in place on the train.
Crack the windows
open. Only because, well, you know why. Anyway,
I don't want a phone call from Prosser. But there you go. Well, not about that anyway. Phone call from him is always very welcome, said he quickly. And that's sadly all we've got time for this week. A good old chat. I enjoyed that, Richard. A good old bit of railway to and fro there, laced with politics throughout. It was an eaten mess of railways and politics, wasn't it? So that was
what's a curious analogy, but I'll go with it. Sounds
all
good.
All mixed up nicely together. So thanks so much for watching. Thanks for staying with us or listening. And don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, or support us somewhere or other in whatever platform you're using makes possible. Subscribe to the channel. Do catch up with the Huw Merriman interview if you haven't watched it yet. And most importantly, join us again next week when Richard and I will be looking forward to your company again. So thanks for being with us this time, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.